Sure. So for the funeral mass of Pope Benedict XVI, the Emeritus Pope, we expect it to be much like the funeral of John Paul II. This was the last papal funeral, and in fact it was Joseph Ratzinger, as Dean of the College of Cardinals, who celebrated the mass and gave the homily at the funeral. So we haven't had a papal funeral since 2005. What's different is that it's not a reigning pope who has died. So whereas the Vatican would normally be shut up, the closed shop, actually there is a reigning pope. So all of the offices are open. It isn't going to be lots of heads of states. So the German and the Italian president are going to be there. Many of the heads of the offices of the Vatican are going to be there in a personal capacity. And the Pope himself has indicated that he's going to celebrate the funeral service. So many of the arrangements are going to be the same. Some of the prayers will differ because they won't be about a pope who has died, a reigning pope who has died. There'll be readings specially selected. So we expect it in many ways to be similar, but it clearly has set a precedent for the future as well.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about what you think the legacy of Pope Benedict XVI will be. How do you think he'll be remembered?
I think that Pope Benedict XVI, he won't be remembered as a great manager or a great media personality, but I think he will be remembered as one of the most influential Christian writers and teachers and theologians of the 20th and the 21st century. So he was an incredible person. His birth was only a year apart from the Queen. And as we spoke of her as a great Christian, a devoted Christian servant, I think Pope Benedict's legacy will be much in the same vein, that someone throughout his very, very long life was a life of devoted service to the church. And through his 66 books, his various encyclicals, a whole priesthood full of homilies, particularly on themes of holiness, of Christian love, he'll be remembered as one of the great theologians, who was involved in some of the main moves as the Vatican and the Catholic Church throughout the world has sought to spread its voice into the modern world. And so Pope Benedict came at a time where the world was very, very secularized, a secularization, an increasingly unreligious world. And he, as a faithful but devoted academic, used the world stage in a unique way to kind of share the relevance that Christianity has in the modern age.
Okay, and just tell us a little bit about Benedict himself as a person and how he approached the role of Pope, because he was quite a different character and a different style to his predecessor and indeed his successor.
Pope Benedict's style as Pope was very, very different, not only from his previous role as head of the Vatican Watchdog, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, but also from his predecessor and successor. So what was unique about Pope Benedict XVI? I think in many ways he was very, very humble. He was a shy, retiring, quite introverted intellectual, but there was a kind of deep, prayerful peace and love. So whereas many had this image, and the phrase was often used, God's Rottweiler, for many who encountered, saw, had conversations with the Pope, read his writing, I think what happened was one saw that this caricature of Benedict didn't really stand up to life. It wasn't so much God's Rottweiler as it was the German Shepherd. And I think many people in the UK in particular saw this in a profound way when he came for a state visit in September in 2010. So the media had portrayed this image of, oh gosh, there's going to be this quite, overbearing, reactionary, conservative Pope. And actually what people saw was a kind of grand paternal figure, a kind of grandfather who came and spoke quite powerfully, not only to religious and civic leaders, but to ordinary Catholics in a way that inspired people.
Okay, and I must ask at this point, if you don't mind, did you ever meet Pope Benedict XVI at all?
So I was lucky enough as an 18-year-old to go to World Youth Day, a gathering of Catholics. So this was 500,000 young Catholics with Pope Benedict in World Youth Day in Sydney, Australia. And this held a special resonance for Pope Benedict, so much so that as he's been lying in state, the vestment, the clothes that he's wearing, the priestly clothes, are actually the clothes he wore at the final mass of that encounter. And I remember as an 18-year-old with some of my friends, the Pope drove past us at 20 miles an hour. It wasn't a significant meeting, but I remember just being so profoundly excited, like unexpectedly excited. And then when he came for his papal visit in September 2010, I was privileged to be in the piazza in the square in front of Westminster Cathedral for an encounter with over 5,000 young people who gathered, where he spoke about love, that they were created by love, for love, with love, to love. And it was I just had this profound change in my impression of Pope Benedict the man as someone who was a really devoted servant of the church, a really humble but powerful preacher. So I really treasure those, not only World Youth Day, this great youth event in Australia, but also when he came to the UK in 2010.
Okay, and perhaps finally then, obviously, one thing that Pope Benedict XVI will be remembered for is the fact that he resigned, becoming the first Pope in many centuries to do so. What do you think his resignation will mean for the future? Do you think he's now set a precedent, and is that something we're likely to see happen again?
Pope Benedict was the first pope to resign in over 500 years. And this set a precedent. Not only he chose his own title of Pope Emeritus, retired Pope, and it came as a great shock to the Catholic world and to the world at large. And there have been many kind of theories and conspiracy theories about why he did this, but Pope Benedict speaks candidly himself in one of his last kind of personal biographies, the Last Testament, where he says that it was a fruit of prayer, a fruit of interior discernment, not in reaction to things that were going on around him, although those certainly influenced it. And I think Pope Francis, his successor, has often spoken about how this was a great gesture of humility from a humble servant of the church. And so it lays the ground for the future. So Pope Francis has indicated that if his mental capacity or his capacity to govern the church is impaired in any way through physical or mental health, that Pope Benedict has really allowed that possibility to be able to retire in a way that hadn't been. It was kind of till death do us part. So I think it was a real move that Pope Benedict thought he didn't have the power to do the governance and the reform of the church that was needed, that his successor Pope Francis has taken on. So I think it will stand as one of the chief legacies of Pope Benedict XVI, this really remarkable move, and has meant that his successors in the future are able to do the same.